I learned a long time ago that safety is just a story we tell ourselves before everything falls apart. That night, standing in my cramped studio above Moretti's bakery with flour dust still caught in my hair and the smell of rising dough seeping through the floorboards, I heard footsteps that didn't belong. Heavy, deliberate, the kind that announce ownership rather than arrival. My keys were still in my hand. I'd been so tired after the double shift, so desperate to peel off my sneakers and collapse into bed, that I'd forgotten to turn the lock. Such a small thing. Such a catastrophic mistake. When I turned, Dominic Castellano was already inside. He leaned against my unlocked door like he'd been waiting his whole life to walk through it, and I felt something in my chest crystallize into ice. Everyone in Brooklyn knew that name. The most dangerous man in the city didn't need to raise his voice when he said, "You shouldn't feel safe here." His words fell into my small space like stones into still water, and I watched the ripples of them reshape everything I thought I knew about my new life. I'd been invisible for 2 weeks, or so I thought. Working the early shift at Moretti's, keeping my head down, speaking to no one who didn't need change for a 20, counting the days until I could breathe again, until the past stopped chasing me through every shadow. But Dominic Castellano moved through my apartment with the casual authority of someone who owned every inch of it, and I realized with dawning horror that I'd never been invisible at all. He didn't look like the monsters in movies. That was the first thing that terrified me. He wore an expensive dark suit that fit him like intention, and his face held the kind of beauty that made you forget to be afraid until it was too late. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that saw too much, black hair touched with silver at the temples. But it was the way he moved that stopped my breath. Like gravity worked differently for him. Like the world rearranged itself to accommodate his presence. You will feel so many emotions in this mysterious love story I'm about to tell. Please support us by clicking subscribe to the channel. He walked to my kitchen table. 3 steps. That's all it took to cross my entire life, and pointed to the manila envelope I'd hidden behind my refrigerator. The one I'd been trying to figure out how to deliver for 3 weeks. The one that was supposed to save his life. Did you really think I wouldn't come for what's mine? His voice was quieter than I expected. Quieter and somehow more absolute, like he didn't need volume to make the walls listen. I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against my thighs, tried to remember how to make words form in the right order, how to explain the inexplicable. I didn't steal it for money. I finally managed. My voice sounded strange, too high. I cleared my throat. "I took it to protect you." Something flickered across his face. Not disbelief? Exactly. More like he was calculating the distance between my words and the truth, measuring the weight of my fear against the audacity of what I'd just said. He pulled out one of my mismatched kitchen chairs, the one with the wobbly leg I kept meaning to fix, and sat down like we were old friends about to discuss the weather. "Protect me," he repeated. The corner of his mouth lifted, but it wasn't quite a smile. From what, exactly? So I told him. The words spilled out of me in a rush, tripping over each other. Desperate and honest and probably suicidal. I told him about the party I shouldn't have been at. The coat room where I'd been hiding from a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. The moment I'd recognized the handwriting on the envelope someone had left in a jacket pocket. James Carver's handwriting. His most trusted advisor. The man planning his execution. I didn't know what to do with it, I said. I didn't know who to trust. So I just ran. I came here. I thought maybe if I could just figure out how to get it to you without getting myself killed. How long have you been here? He interrupted. 2 weeks. And you've been working at Moretti's. It wasn't a question. He already knew. The ice in my chest spread to my limbs. How long had he been watching me? How long had I been performing my pathetic little pantomime of normalcy while he observed from the shadows, deciding whether I was a threat or an asset or just another problem to solve? I watched his hands as he opened the envelope, spreading the papers across my table like he was reading a menu. Long fingers, no rings, a thin white scar across the back of his left hand that looked old and deliberate. The documents contained everything: coded messages, financial transfers, meeting times, the names of the men James had recruited for the coup, proof that would either save Dominic Castellano's life or get me killed for possessing it. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic, someone laughing on the street below, the normal sounds of a city that had no idea what was happening in this small room. I watched Dominic's face as he read, watched the anger in his dark eyes slowly shift into something heavier. Calculation, recognition, and maybe, the first dangerous edge of trust. He looked up at me, and I felt the full force of his attention like a physical thing, like being seen through a microscope, like being known in ways I'd spent my whole life trying to avoid. "What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Price. Emma Price," he repeated, tasting the syllables. Then he stood, pocketed the envelope, and moved to my window. He studied the street below like he was memorizing every shadow, every doorway, every possible threat. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. "You were at Marcus Chen's fundraiser 3 weeks ago. You don't move in those circles. Why were you really there?" My throat went dry. Because I'd been tracking James Carver for 2 years. Because he'd destroyed my mother. Because I'd been looking for revenge or justice or just some way to understand why the world had taken everything from us. But I couldn't say any of that. Not yet. Not to him. "I was working coat check," I said instead. Half true. The best lies always were. He watched me for a long moment, and I knew he didn't believe me, but he didn't push. "Not yet." "Tomorrow morning," he said, his voice taking on a different quality. Command wrapped in silk. "A car will pick you up for work. Don't argue. Don't refuse. The people who wanted me dead now know exactly who you are. They've known since the moment you left that party with their evidence in your bag. You've been a dead woman walking for 3 weeks, Emma. You just didn't know it yet." The words landed like blows. I thought of those 2 weeks of careful invisibility, of believing I'd successfully disappeared. But I'd been a ghost haunting my own life, already marked for execution, just waiting for the sentence to be carried out. "Why didn't they come for me sooner?" I whispered. "Because they wanted to see who you'd run to, who you'd tell, whether you were working alone or part of something larger." His jaw tightened. "You led them nowhere, which means they're out of patience. And James? He's already making moves. This," he gestured to the envelope, "accelerated everything." He walked to my door, and I felt panic rising in my throat. He was leaving. He was going to walk out and leave me here, exposed and alone, marked for death by people I couldn't even name. But he paused with his hand on the doorframe, his back to me, and said something that changed everything. "From now on, no one touches you." Not without answering to me. The black Lincoln was waiting outside Moretti's at 5:47 a.m., 17 minutes before my shift started, its engine purring like a predator at rest. I stood on the sidewalk with my keys digging into my palm, watching my breath crystallize in the November air, and felt the weight of every choice I'd ever made pressing down on my shoulders. The driver was a mountain of a man in a dark suit, his face expressionless as he opened the rear door. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just stood there like this was my new normal, like the entire architecture of my life had been rebuilt overnight, while I slept 3 fitful hours and woke to find Dominic Castellano's business card on my kitchen counter, with a single word written on the back in elegant script. Soon. I wanted to refuse. God, I wanted to walk past that car and through Moretti's front door and pretend yesterday had been a fever dream, that the most dangerous man in Brooklyn hadn't sat at my kitchen table and declared me his responsibility. But the memory of his words, "They know exactly who you are," made my keys feel useless in my pocket. What good was independence if I was too dead to enjoy it? I got in the car. The leather seats smelled like money and power and choices I didn't know how to make. Through the tinted windows, Brooklyn looked different, sharper somehow, like I was seeing it through a filter that revealed the hidden architecture of control underneath the ordinary bustle. We passed Tommy's bodega where I bought my coffee, the laundromat where Mrs. Chen always had a kind word, the bus stop where I used to wait in the rain. My old life, already receding into memory. When we pulled up to Moretti's, I saw it immediately. The change in the air, in the way people moved around me. Marco, the baker who usually grunted good morning while his hands shaped focaccia, wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophia, who'd been teaching me Italian curse words over espresso, suddenly remembered she had inventory to count in the back. Even Mr. Moretti himself, the 70-year-old Sicilian who'd hired me without asking questions, gave me a look that was part pity, part fear, and entirely unwelcome. Everyone in the neighborhood could smell Castellano's protection on me like expensive cologne, and it made me radioactive. I lasted until noon before I broke. Sophia was avoiding me so obviously that I cornered her by the walk-in freezer, desperate for some shred of normalcy, some acknowledgement that I was still the same person I'd been yesterday. "What did I do?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. She looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. "You didn't do anything, Kara. That's the problem. When someone like him decides to protect you, you don't get a choice in what it costs. Neither does anyone around you." The words settled into my chest like lead. I thought about my mother in those final months, how the weight of consequences she never chose had crushed her so slowly I didn't see it happening until it was too late. How debt and betrayal and a legal system designed to protect predators had erased her piece by piece until there was nothing left but a woman in a nursing home bed who didn't recognize her own daughter. I'd sworn I would never be that powerless again. I'd sworn I would never let anyone else pay for my choices. But I was learning that some choices make themselves, and all you can do is survive them. That afternoon, Dominic appeared. He didn't come through the front door like a normal person. One moment I was wiping down tables in the empty dining room, and the next he was just there, standing by the espresso machine like he'd materialized from the steam itself. He wore different clothes today: dark jeans, a black sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a wool coat that made him look like he'd stepped out of a film about beautiful, dangerous men who always get what they want. "Walk with me," he said. Not a request. I should have said no. Should have told him I had work, that I couldn't just leave, that I was tired of being moved around like a chess piece on a board I couldn't see. But Mr. Moretti appeared from the back and waved me away before I could form the words. And I understood with crystalline clarity that nothing here belonged to me anymore. Not my job, not my choices, not even my right to refuse. We walked through Brooklyn in silence, past brownstones and corner stores, and the small parks where mothers watched their children play. Dominic moved through it all like water, effortless and inevitable, and I felt myself adjusting my pace to match his, felt my body learning the rhythm of existing in his orbit. It should have terrified me. Maybe it did. But there was something else there too. Something I didn't have a name for yet. He led me to a small cafe I'd never noticed before, the kind of place that looked like nothing from the outside but held secrets in its bones. The owner, an elderly Italian woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, took one look at Dominic and immediately ushered us to a private booth in the back. She brought espresso without being asked, and a plate of biscotti that smelled like my grandmother's kitchen, and then she disappeared like smoke. "You can't stay at Moretti's," Dominic said without preamble. "It's too exposed, too many eyes, too many people who'd sell information about you for the price of their monthly insurance premium. So what am I supposed to do?" I kept my voice steady, but my hands were shaking around the tiny espresso cup. "Just quit. Just walk away from the only job I have. I'm offering you something better. I don't want your charity." "It's not charity." His dark eyes held mine, and I felt that same microscope intensity from last night, that sense of being known in ways I hadn't agreed to. "I have legitimate businesses, Emma, real ones. A security consulting firm in Manhattan that needs someone with your particular attention to detail. The pay is triple what you're making now. The apartment comes with the position, and you'll be somewhere I can actually protect you without putting everyone around you in danger." The offer hung between us like a baited trap. Triple pay. A Manhattan apartment. A fresh start under his watch. The conditions were unspoken but absolute. I would be his responsibility, his investment, his problem to solve. Every instinct I had screamed that this was wrong, that accepting meant surrendering some essential part of myself I'd never get back. But I thought about the spray paint I'd seen on my way to work this morning, the word traitor bleeding across Moretti's front window in angry red letters. I thought about the dead bird someone had left on my doorstep, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. I thought about Sophia's sad eyes and Mr. Moretti's fear and the way my old life was already burning down around me whether I accepted Dominic's offer or not. "What's the real price?" I asked. "Because men like you don't make offers like this without expecting something in return." For the first time since I'd met him, something like approval flickered across his face. Maybe even respect. "The real price is that you live," he said simply. "You wake up tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. You get to have a future instead of becoming another name in the obituaries. Another cautionary tale about what happens to people who see too much. Is that expensive enough for you? I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him I could take care of myself, that I'd been doing it just fine for years, that I didn't need a dangerous man with blood on his hands deciding what my life was worth. But the truth was sitting in my throat like broken glass. I couldn't take care of myself. Not anymore. Not against enemies I couldn't name, threats I couldn't predict, a world that had decided I was expendable the moment I picked up that envelope. When would I start? I heard myself ask, and felt something inside me crack and resettle. Tonight. Pack light. The apartment is furnished. We'll handle the rest. That evening, I stood in my tiny studio above Moretti's bakery and tried to figure out what pieces of yourself you take when you're leaving everything behind. I packed my mother's necklace, the only thing James Carver's lawyers hadn't managed to take. A photograph of her before the sickness, when she still smiled like she believed in tomorrow. 3 books I'd read so many times the spines were broken. Clothes that had seen better days but still felt like mine. The rest, the furniture I'd bought at thrift stores, the dishes I'd collected one at a time, the small accumulations of attempting to build a life, I left behind like evidence of a crime I was still committing. The car came at 8. Same driver, same expressionless face, same sense that I was being moved according to a plan I'd never been consulted about. As we drove toward Manhattan, I watched Brooklyn disappear in the rearview mirror and felt like I was watching my own funeral. The girl who'd thought she could start over, who'd believed invisibility was the same as safety, who'd convinced herself that 2 weeks of keeping her head down meant she'd escaped the past. That girl was gone. And I didn't know yet who I was becoming in her place. The apartment Dominic provided was on the 32nd floor of a building in Tribeca that had a doorman and an elevator that required a keycard and windows that looked out over Manhattan, like the city was just another possession you could own if you had enough money. The furniture was expensive and impersonal, all clean lines and neutral colors, the kind of space designed for someone without a history. I hated it immediately. Not because it was ugly, but because it was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with me. And I was learning that beauty could be another kind of prison. I was standing by those floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights blur through tears I refused to let fall, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I should have ignored it, should have blocked it, should have done literally anything except open the message. But I did. And the world tilted sideways. The photo showed me leaving Moretti's 3 weeks ago, the day after the fundraiser, the manila envelope visible in my canvas bag. The angle was from across the street, professional, deliberate. Someone had been following me even then, documenting my movements, building a case. On the back, written in elegant script, the same script as Dominic's business card, was a name I'd been trying to forget. James Carver sends his regards. Below it, a single line that stopped my heart. You were chosen as a message. Run again, and everyone you've ever spoken to pays for it. The apartment Dominic provided had floor-to-ceiling windows that turned Manhattan into a postcard. But I'd never felt more trapped. 3 days passed in suspended animation, learning routines of a life that didn't belong to me, walking through rooms that smelled like expensive nothing. He came by on the 3rd night. No knock. No warning. Just the sound of someone who had keys to spaces I was only borrowing. Get dressed, he said. We're going somewhere. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm aware of the time. Something in his voice made me not argue. When I emerged from the bedroom in jeans and boots, he was on his phone, speaking rapid Italian. He looked different tonight, harder, like whatever mask he wore during daylight had been stripped away. Where are we going? To show you the real world, Emma. The one you've been living in without seeing it. We drove to the Brooklyn waterfront in his Mercedes. The warehouse sat at the edge of Red Hook, surrounded by shipping containers and the dark smell of the East River. The kind of place that didn't exist on official maps. What you're about to see is what protection actually looks like, Dominic said before we went inside. Not the sanitized version you imagine. The real machinery of power. You need to understand what I am, what you've gotten yourself tangled up in. Inside, men moved with purpose through pools of industrial light. In the center, a man sat in a metal chair, his hands zip-tied, his face showing early stages of interrogation. This is Marcus Chen's accountant, Dominic said conversationally. He's been skimming money for 18 months. Someone was paying him, someone building a case. I watched Dominic extract information with surgical precision. No violence. No dramatic threats. Just methodical questioning that revealed names from the envelope, dates corresponding to territorial disputes, an entire network planning his systematic takedown. This was what power looked like. Not explosions and gunfights, but the quiet inevitability of consequences. When it was over, I stood by the river-facing wall, trying to process what I'd witnessed. "You think I'm a monster now?" he said. "I think you're exactly what you've always been. I just understand it better now." He moved beside me, both of us staring at black water and distant lights. "The world you came from, with laws and justice? That world is a lie, Emma. The real world is power and consequences. The strong deciding the fate of the weak. Is that what you think you are? Strong? No. I'm what happens when someone weak gets tired of being crushed. There's a difference." His phone buzzed. His entire body changed, muscles tensing, jaw tightening. "We need to leave. Now. James Carver knows you're in Manhattan." The drive back was silent except for his 3 rapid calls. When we reached my building, the doorman handed Dominic an envelope, his hand trembling. Inside was a photograph. Me leaving Moretti's 3 weeks ago, the envelope visible in my bag. Written on back, "James Carver sends his regards. You were chosen as a message. He's been watching you longer than I have," Dominic said quietly. "Which means everything that's happened has been part of a plan we're only beginning to see." The elevator opened to my floor. A thin man in an expensive suit leaned against my apartment door. "Mr. Castellano, Miss Price, James thought you might appreciate a personal introduction. I'm here to extend his invitation to dinner. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. He walked toward the elevator and Dominic let him pass. As the doors closed, the man's smile widened. "Oh, and Emma, James wanted me to tell you he's very much looking forward to finishing the conversation your mother started. She had such interesting things to say before the end." The man's words about my mother echoed in the apartment long after he left, bouncing off the expensive walls like bullets ricocheting in an empty chamber. I stood frozen in the hallway while Dominic made calls, his voice a low, controlled fury that never rose above conversation level, but somehow felt more dangerous than screaming. When he finally ended the last call, the silence between us was so heavy I could barely breathe through it. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice coming from somewhere far away. "Did you know James had contact with my mother before she died?" Dominic turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression shift. Not guilt exactly, but a kind of weary recognition, like he'd been waiting for this question and dreading it in equal measure. "I knew James handled estate liquidations for families in financial distress," he said carefully. "I didn't know your mother was one of them, not until tonight." "You're lying." "No." His voice went quiet. "Absolute. I don't lie to you, Emma. That's the one thing I can promise in all of this. I may keep secrets. I may protect you from truths you're not ready for. But I won't lie. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that this man who'd upended my entire life in 3 days hadn't known that his most trusted advisor had systematically destroyed the woman who gave me life. But belief required trust, and trust required a foundation I wasn't sure we had. "We need rules," I said finally. "If this is going to work, if I'm going to survive whatever game James is playing, we need rules between us." Something flickered across Dominic's face. Surprise? Maybe. Or respect. He moved to the kitchen island, poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle I hadn't bought, and slid one across to me. The gesture was so casually domestic it made my chest ache. "All right," he said. "Rules. I'll give you 3. You give me 1. "Why 3? "Because I'm trying to keep you alive, and that requires more structure than whatever moral framework you're operating under." "Fair point." I took a sip of the whiskey, expensive, smooth, the kind of thing my mother would have appreciated before James took everything, and waited. "Rule 1, Dominic began, his dark eyes holding mine with that intensity that made me feel transparent. "You don't leave this building without telling me first. Not for coffee, not for air, not for any reason that feels urgent in the moment. James just proved he can reach you anywhere. The only advantage we have is controlling the environment." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that wasn't protection, it was imprisonment. But the memory of that man's smile, the casual cruelty in his mention of my mother, made the protest die in my throat. "Rule 2. You don't trust anyone I haven't explicitly cleared. Not neighbors. Not delivery people. Not friendly strangers in elevators. James is good at turning people into weapons without them even knowing they've been weaponized. That's paranoid. That's experience. His jaw tightened. I've lost people because they thought kindness was the same as safety, because they believed good intentions protected them from bad actors. They were wrong, and they're dead. The bluntness of it hit like a slap. No softening, no apology. Just the brutal arithmetic of a world where trust got you killed. And Rule 3? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me like he was trying to decide something important. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Softer, but somehow more serious. Rule 3 is that you tell me the truth. Always. Even when it's hard. Even when you think it'll make me angry or make things worse. Because the moment you start keeping secrets from me is the moment James wins. He's counting on us not trusting each other. On you believing I'm the bigger threat. On me wondering if you're playing both sides. We don't give him that weapon. The irony wasn't lost on me. A man whose entire existence was built on secrets demanding absolute honesty. But I understood the logic underneath. In a world of lies, truth became the only reliable currency. My turn, I said. One rule. I'm listening. You don't lie to me about the danger. Not about James. Not about what this costs. Not about what you're capable of. I took a breath. I need to know exactly what I'm part of. What you've done. What you're willing to do. Because if I'm going to survive this, I need to be able to make decisions with real information, not sanitized versions designed to protect my delicate sensibilities. Dominic's expression did something complicated. Surprise and admiration and something darker. Like he was realizing I might be more dangerous than he'd calculated. He raised his glass in a small salute. Deal. No lies. No protection from ugly truths. You want to know what I am? I'll show you. But you don't get to unsee it once I do. I'm already seeing it. No, you've seen the surface, the mechanism, but you haven't seen the cost yet. What it takes out of me, what it'll take out of you if you stay. We drank in silence, and I felt something shift between us. Some invisible line being crossed. Some unspoken acknowledgement that we were in this together now. Not because either of us wanted to be, but because James had given us no choice. Over the next 3 days, a strange rhythm developed between us. Dominic would arrive in the mornings with files and coffee, spreading evidence across my dining table like we were building a case together. I learned to recognize patterns in James's communications, dates that coincided with territorial disputes, money that moved in directions that only made sense if someone was planning a systematic coup. We worked in companionable silence most of the time, but occasionally he'd tell me things. Small things. His father had been a mechanic in Queens who'd borrowed money from the wrong people and paid with his life. His mother had raised 3 sons alone, working doubles at a hospital while pretending she didn't know what her oldest was becoming. He'd been 17 when he killed his first person, the loan shark who'd murdered his father. And he remembered every detail with the clarity of trauma that never quite healed. Does it get easier? I asked one afternoon, not sure if I meant killing or surviving or just existing in a world this broken. No, he said simply. You just get better at carrying it. I told him things too. About my mother's slow deterioration, how she'd started forgetting words and then whole conversations, and then finally who I was. How I'd sat by her hospital bed reading her favorite books aloud even though she couldn't understand them anymore, couldn't recognize my voice, couldn't do anything but breathe and blink and slowly disappear. How James had visited her once, right at the end, and I'd watched through the window as he'd leaned close and whispered something that made her eyes go wide with terror even though she couldn't remember her own name. What did he say to her? Dominic asked quietly. I don't know. But whatever it was, she died that night. Heart attack. Except her heart had been fine that morning. And James smiled at me at the funeral like he'd just won something. Dominic's hands tightened into fists on the table. And I saw that cold fury flood back into his expression. The same look he'd had at the warehouse. The same absolute certainty of consequences. We're going to that dinner tomorrow, he said. And we're going to smile. And we're going to play whatever game James thinks he's orchestrating. Because the only way to beat him is to make him think he's already won. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows watching Manhattan pretend to be peaceful, and felt Dominic's presence before I heard him. He'd stayed late, working through documents in the living room, and now he moved to stand beside me in the darkness. "Can't sleep either?" I asked. "Not when I'm trying to figure out how to keep someone alive who keeps making it difficult." "I'm not trying to make it difficult. I know. That's what makes it worse." He turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the city, his face held an expression I couldn't quite name. "You're not afraid of me. You should be. But you're not. And I can't decide if that's brave or stupid. Maybe it's both. Maybe." We stood there in the darkness, and then I felt something dangerous happening. Some erosion of the boundaries that were supposed to exist between people like us, between the woman trying to survive and the man capable of orchestrating her destruction. I should have stepped away. Should have maintained distance. Should have remembered that protection and possession were just different words for the same cage. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was, close enough to feel the heat from his body, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with exhaustion and something darker underneath, close enough to make a choice that would change everything. "Dominic," I said quietly, "when this is over, when James is dealt with and I'm safe, what happens to us?" "There is no us, Emma. There's just you surviving. That's all this is." "You're lying." He went very still. "I don't lie to you." "Then tell me the truth. What happens when I don't need protection anymore?" The silence stretched so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Then you walk away. You go back to being the person you were supposed to be before I walked through your unlocked door, and I go back to being the monster who kept you alive long enough to escape. What if I don't want to escape?" He turned to face me fully then, and the expression in his dark eyes was something close to pain. "Then I'm doing this wrong. Because the whole point is that you get to have a life, Emma. A real one. Not this halfway existence in an expensive cage, pretending that protection is the same as freedom." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, and I watched his entire body change, every muscle tensing, that cold calculation flooding back. "What is it?" He showed me the screen, a photograph, sent from an unknown number. It showed the two of us standing at this exact window, moments ago, our silhouettes clear against the city lights. The timestamp was from 30 seconds ago. Written below, "Tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Both of you. Come alone, or Emma's friend Sarah learns exactly what kind of people her old friend associates with now." Starting with the body count, I felt the blood drain from my face. Sarah, my oldest friend, the one person from my old life who still checked on me, who still thought I was the same Emma who'd left for Brooklyn 2 months ago. "He has her," I whispered. "He has leverage," Dominic corrected. "There's a difference. But yes, tomorrow we go to that dinner. We play his game, and we end this." He moved to leave, then paused at the door, his hand on the frame. When he looked back, something had shifted in his expression. Some barrier had fallen away to reveal the man underneath, the one who'd started as someone weak and chosen to become feared rather than destroyed. "Emma, that rule about not lying, it goes both ways. So I need to tell you something." "What?" "I knew who you were before you took that envelope. I'd been tracking James's movements for months. I knew he was planning something. And when you walked out of that fundraiser with proof of his betrayal, I thought you were part of his plan. Another weapon, another test. My heart stopped. Then why did you protect me? Because I watched you for 3 weeks. Watched you try to figure out how to get that envelope to me without getting yourself killed. Watched you work double shifts and count pennies and live in that tiny apartment like you were trying to disappear into nothing. And I realized you weren't part of his plan. You were collateral damage, just like I used to be." He opened the door. "Tomorrow night, we finish this. Together. Because you're not collateral anymore, Emma. You're the one person in this entire war who chose to fight for something besides power, and that makes you more dangerous than any of us." The door closed behind him, and I was left standing in the darkness, processing what he'd just admitted. He'd been watching me, protecting me, seeing me in ways I hadn't known I needed to be seen. And tomorrow we were walking into James Carver's trap with nothing but trust between us and destruction. I returned to the window, staring out at the city that suddenly felt full of eyes. Somewhere out there, someone was watching this apartment, recording our movements, building a case or preparing an execution or just documenting the slow dissolution of whatever safety I'd thought I'd found. My phone buzzed. Another message. Another photograph. This one showing Sarah sitting in what looked like an expensive restaurant, a man's hand visible on her shoulder. The man's watch was distinctive. Expensive. The same watch James Carver had worn at my mother's funeral. Below the photo. She's lovely. Reminds me so much of your mother at that age. It would be such a shame if she shared the same fate. See you tomorrow. Emma, don't be late. What medications? He pulled out a file with my mother's name on it. Listed inside were drugs I'd never heard of, experimental compounds, off-label uses of antipsychotics, combinations designed to systematically destroy cognitive function while mimicking natural decline. They'd turned her brain into a chemical battlefield and called it treatment. Why? My voice broke on the word. Why would James do this? For control of her estate. She'd inherited property in Brooklyn that James wanted. Several buildings, including, Dr. Chen glanced at Dominic, the building that houses Moretti's bakery. Everything stopped. The apartment I'd been living in, the job I'd been working, the place where Dominic had found me. None of it had been accident. None of it had been choice. James had destroyed my mother to steal property, and then he'd watched me run to the very building he'd murdered her for, like I was a mouse in a maze he'd designed. He knew, I whispered. When I moved to Brooklyn, when I got the job at Moretti's, he knew exactly where I was going because he owned it, because he'd taken it from her. Dominic's expression had gone absolutely cold. James doesn't own Moretti's. I do. I bought that entire block 2 years ago when the previous owner, he stopped mid-sentence, and I watched realization dawn across his face like watching ice form on water. When James Carver needed cash fast and sold off assets, he sold me property he'd stolen from your mother. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of Dr. Chen's desk, trying to understand the shape of the trap we were standing in. James had destroyed my mother for property. Dominic had unknowingly bought stolen property. I'd fled to that property thinking I was disappearing, but I'd been running exactly where James wanted me to go. And now we were walking into his dinner with all the pieces finally visible, but no way to put them back together. There's one more thing, Dr. Chen said quietly. Your mother, before the medications took full effect, she left something with me. Said if anything happened to her, if her daughter ever came looking for answers, I should give it to you. He pulled a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. My mother's handwriting on the front, shaky but unmistakable. For Emma. The truth about James Carver. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten letter. The photo showed James and my stepfather 20 years ago, standing in front of a building I recognized. The same warehouse where Dominic had taken me. Where men extracted information and consequences were measured in broken bones and broken lives. I read my mother's letter, and with each sentence, the world I thought I understood crumbled and reformed into something darker. James Carver hadn't just been my stepfather's business partner. He'd been his executioner. Had murdered him and made it look like natural causes. Had courted my mother afterward, positioning himself to inherit everything. When she discovered the truth, he'd made her disappear the slowest way possible, by erasing her mind before he could erase her life. And the final line, written in my mother's failing hand, he works for them, Emma, for the family. He always has. Everything he's done, to your father, to me, to you, it's all been in service to Dominic Castellano's world. I looked up at Dominic and saw in his eyes that he'd already read it over my shoulder. Saw the moment he understood what I was understanding, that James hadn't betrayed him recently. James had been his man all along, and everything that had happened, my mother's destruction, my flight to Brooklyn, the envelope I'd found, Dominic walking through my unlocked door, all of it had been orchestrated by someone pulling strings neither of us had seen. We need to leave, Dominic said quietly. Now, the dinner tonight isn't a negotiation, it's an execution, and we just walked into exactly the position they wanted us in. But before we could move, Dr. Chen's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, then went completely white. He turned the phone toward us. On the screen was a live video feed showing Sarah tied to a chair in what looked like an elegant restaurant. James Carver sitting beside her, smiling at the camera. Hello, Emma. James's voice came through the speaker. I was hoping you'd visit Dr. Chen today. Saves us so much time on exposition. You have 1 hour to get to the restaurant. Come alone, both of you. Or I'll show Sarah exactly what your mother felt in those final moments before her heart gave out. And I promise you, Emma, it wasn't natural causes. The line went dead. Word count, 1,626. Let me revise to 800 words. Chapter 5, What We Carry. The dinner invitation sat between us like a loaded gun for 2 days. But on the second night, something shifted. I was reading bank statements when a name jumped out. Helen Price, my mother. Transactions from 3 years ago, right before she started forgetting things. Large withdrawals, payments to facilities I'd never heard of, and signatures that looked like hers but weren't quite right. My hands started shaking so badly the papers scattered. What did you find? Dominic's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. I couldn't speak, could only point while my vision blurred. He was beside me instantly, his hand on my back. Breathe. I've got you. When I could finally speak, the words came out broken. James didn't just handle my mother's estate, he orchestrated it, forged her signature, sent her to facilities that made her sick and profited from it. Dominic studied the documents with cold precision. These payments go to Dr. Raymond Chen, a private psychiatric facility in Connecticut specializing in chemically induced cognitive decline for estate fraud. The clinical language hit like a physical blow. They'd destroyed her brain on purpose. I need to see him, I said. Dr. Chen. I need to know exactly what they did. Dominic made a call. He'll see us tomorrow morning, before the dinner. The facility was beautiful in that terrible way expensive medical buildings always are. Dr. Chen met us in his office, trembling when he saw Dominic. The Price woman, he said. James Carver brought her 3 years ago. Said she had early onset dementia. Said the family wanted aggressive treatment. My mother was fine until you touched her. His face went pale. I didn't know. Not at first. By the time I realized the diagnosis was fabricated, the damage was irreversible. He showed me the file. Experimental compounds, off-label antipsychotics, combinations designed to destroy cognitive function while mimicking natural decline. Why would James do this? For control of her estate. She'd inherited property in Brooklyn. Several buildings, including, he glanced at Dominic, the building that houses Moretti's bakery. Everything stopped. The apartment I'd been living in. The job. The place where Dominic found me. None of it had been accident. James had destroyed my mother for property, then watched me run to the very building he'd murdered her for. James doesn't own Moretti's, Dominic said slowly. I do. I bought that block 2 years ago when he sold off assets. He stopped, realization dawning. He sold me property he'd stolen from your mother. The trap became visible. James had destroyed my mother for property. Dominic had unknowingly bought it. I'd fled there thinking I was disappearing, but I'd been running exactly where James wanted. One more thing, Dr. Chen said. Your mother left something. Said if her daughter came looking, I should give it to you. He handed me a sealed envelope, my mother's handwriting, for Emma. The truth about James Carver. Inside was a photograph. James and my stepfather 20 years ago, standing in front of the warehouse where Dominic had taken me. And a letter. With each sentence, my world crumbled. James hadn't just been my stepfather's partner, he'd been his murderer. Had courted my mother afterward to inherit everything. When she discovered the truth, he'd erased her mind before erasing her life. The final line, he works for them, Emma, for the family. He always has. Everything he's done, it's all been in service to Dominic Castellano's world. I looked at Dominic. He'd read it over my shoulder. We both understood. James hadn't betrayed him recently. James had been his man all along. And everything that happened had been orchestrated by someone we hadn't seen. We need to leave, Dominic said. The dinner tonight isn't negotiation, it's execution. Dr. Chen's phone rang. He answered, went white, turned it toward us. A live video feed showed Sarah tied to a chair in an elegant restaurant, James Carver beside her, smiling. Hello, Emma. I was hoping you'd visit Dr. Chen today. You have 1 hour to get to the restaurant. Come alone, both of you. Or I'll show Sarah exactly what your mother felt in those final moments before her heart gave out. And I promise you, Emma, it wasn't natural causes. The line went dead. The drive to the restaurant was 43 minutes of calculating survival. Dominic made 7 calls, his voice never rising but carrying absolute command. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression that made my chest tighten. When we walk in there, you let me handle James, no matter what he says. You stay quiet and you stay behind me. He murdered my mother. I know. His jaw tightened. But if you react, if you give him the satisfaction of seeing you break, he wins. That's what he wants, Emma. Not your death, your destruction. What if I want him destroyed too? Then you become me. And I know exactly what it costs. You don't. Not yet. The restaurant was in Soho, expensive and discreet. The maitre d' took one look at Dominic and led us to a private room. James Carver was waiting at a table set for 4, looking exactly as I remembered from my mother's funeral. Expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of face that inspired trust right up until it destroyed you. Sarah sat beside him, alive but terrified, her wrists bound beneath the tablecloth. Emma, James said warmly, and Dominic. So glad you could make it. Please, sit. Dominic remained standing. Release the girl. In time. First, let's clear up some misunderstandings. James smiled, and I saw my mother's terror in that smile. Your mother was lovely, Emma. But she had something I needed, just like you're refusing to be reasonable now. You murdered her. I expedited nature. The medication simply accelerated a decline that would have happened eventually. I just helped it along. Made it profitable. I felt Dominic's hand on my arm, keeping me seated when every instinct screamed to lunge across the table. What do you want? Dominic asked. Recognition that I'm your equal. I've been building my own empire while pretending to serve yours. And now, with Emma's testimony, with evidence of your activities, with Dr. Chen's records proving your organization traffics in estate fraud, I have everything I need to bury you. Except for one problem. What's that? I'm not the one you should be worried about. The door opened. 3 men in federal badges entered, their expressions without mercy. James Carver, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, estate fraud, and falsifying medical records. I watched James's face cycle through disbelief, fury, and finally understanding. He looked at Dominic. You turned me in. No. Dr. Chen did. 2 years ago. He's been cooperating with federal investigators, documenting every case, every patient you destroyed. Your operation is nationwide, and I've known for 18 months. Then why did I let you keep operating? Because I needed to know how deep it went. Who else was involved? You weren't my advisor, James. You were my investigation. And Emma, he glanced at me. She was the catalyst. The one person whose mother you destroyed so thoroughly that when she found evidence, when she came to me, I knew it was real. James lunged, not at them, but at me. His hands closed around my throat, and I felt the same violence that had destroyed my mother. But Dominic was between us instantly. His fist connected with James's jaw with surgical precision. That's for Helen Price. And every other person you destroyed. The agents dragged James away. Dominic moved to cut Sarah's restraints, his voice gentle. You're safe now. My driver will take you home. After Sarah left, Dominic and I stood in that empty room and let the silence settle like ash. You knew about my mother? I said. That's why you bought those buildings. I knew James had killed someone to acquire property. I didn't know it was your mother until you told me her name. I've been trying to build a case for 2 years. And then you walked into my world carrying exactly what I needed. You realized I was his victim too. I realized you were the only person fighting for something besides power. That made you more dangerous than any criminal I've ever faced. What happens now? Now, James goes to prison. And you get to decide who you want to be when this is over. What if I don't know yet? Then you figure it out, without me watching. Without living in an apartment I own. You get to have the life your mother wanted for you. The words should have felt like freedom. Instead, they felt like loss. He moved closer. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. Everything I've done, it's been to keep you alive long enough to be free. But I can't keep you safe from me, from what I am, and you deserve better. You don't get to decide what I deserve. Someone has to, Because you're too brave for your own good. His hand cupped my face. James is gone, which means you don't need me anymore. What if need isn't the point? Then we're both in trouble. He kissed me, not gentle, but desperate. I kissed him back and tasted 3 weeks of protection transformed into something more dangerous. When we broke apart, the air between us was charged with everything we weren't saying. I have to testify, I said. The trial could take months. I know. And afterward, I'll need time to figure out who I am. I know that too. But I'm not walking away. I'm choosing to fight towards something instead of away from something. And I'm choosing you. His expression shifted, surprise and fear and hope. You don't know what you're choosing? Yes, I do. Someone who kept his promise, who gave me truth, who destroyed his own world to give me justice. That's someone worth fighting for. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, tensed, turned it toward me. An email from an unknown sender regarding the Castellano investigation. Attached was a photograph, US side, moments ago, kissing, and a message. James Carver was never the real threat. He was just the opening move. The evidence he collected is now in the hands of people who make him look like a saint. You have 48 hours to turn yourselves in, or everyone Emma has ever cared about will learn what justice looks like when it's coming for you. This is not negotiation. This is notification. I didn't tell Dominic about the photograph. For the first time since he'd walked through my door, I kept a secret, and the weight of it felt like carrying broken glass. Every time he looked at me over the next 24 hours, I felt the lie sitting between us. I had 48 hours to figure out who'd sent that message. James was in custody, but whoever had sent that email was right. He'd never been the real threat. I spent 12 hours investigating while Dominic handled the fallout from James's arrest. The email had been routed through proxy servers, but there was a pattern. It reminded me of communications from someone James called the architect, someone who'd been orchestrating his moves. I found references in Dr. Chen's files. The architect had been funding James's operation, using it to gather leverage on powerful people, governors, judges, business leaders. They'd destroyed vulnerable people like my mother to control the untouchable. By hour 18, I'd narrowed it to 3 federal prosecutors, but one name kept appearing: Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Walsh. She'd led the case against James, and she'd received substantial payments from offshore accounts tracing back to James's network. She wasn't investigating corruption, she was managing it. James's arrest had been a hostile takeover. Now she wanted Dominic's organization. I had 29 hours left when I made my decision. I didn't consult Dominic. I sent Walsh a message. I know who you are. I have copies of everything James collected, including evidence of your involvement. Meet me alone, or I send it to Internal Affairs. Tonight. Pier 17, midnight. It was a bluff. But I had enough fragments to make it credible, and I had what Walsh wanted, the appearance of being someone who could be controlled. I left at 11 through the service entrance, wearing dark clothes and carrying only my phone and a flash drive. Pier 17 was nearly empty at midnight. I waited, counting heartbeats. Rebecca Walsh appeared exactly on time, walking from shadows. Younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, sharp features, expensive clothes. Emma Price. You're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. Where's Dominic? He doesn't know I'm here. Surprise flickered across her face. You came alone. Why? Because this isn't about him. It's about what I know and can prove. I held up the flash drive. James kept excellent records. Financial transactions, communications, recordings proving you've been running his operation. If you had real evidence, you'd have sent it already. If you weren't worried, you wouldn't be here. What do you want, Emma? I want you to leave us alone. James was never the point. He was leverage. Your friend Dominic runs one of the most sophisticated operations on the East Coast. Do you know how valuable that would be in the right hands? She stepped closer. I'm not the villain. I'm trying to reorganize a broken system. Work with me, and you get immunity, protection, or refuse, and watch everyone you care about get buried. For a moment, I saw the appeal. But then I thought about what Walsh was really offering. Another cage, better decorated, another life in service to someone else's agenda. No, I said. No, I'm not joining you. I'm not helping you control Dominic. And I'm not letting you use federal authority to destroy people like James did. Her expression hardened. Then you've made a very expensive mistake. Maybe. Or maybe I'm about to make the best decision of my life. Footsteps behind me. Multiple sets. I turned and saw Dominic emerging with 5 men. He'd known. The expression on his face wasn't anger. It was pride mixed with fury mixed with fear. "Agent Walsh," he said quietly, "let me save you some time. Everything you think you know is documented, legally defensible, and useless. Because unlike James, I've spent 15 years making sure my operations can withstand federal scrutiny. You can't touch me. I'm a federal prosecutor. I'm not going to do anything. But the recording Emma just made of you admitting to running James's operation, to using federal resources for personal gain, to blackmailing citizens, that's going to internal affairs in 60 seconds unless you walk away right now." Walsh's face went pale. "You set me up. I gave you a choice. You chose wrong. I showed her my phone, the recording timer. Walk away, and this stays between us. Come after us, and this goes public. Your career ends. Your network collapses." Walsh stared at me with something like respect. Then she turned and walked into shadows. When she was gone, I turned to Dominic, expecting anger. Instead, he walked toward me slowly. I've never been more terrified, or more proud. His hand cupped my face. "You broke every rule. You lied to me. You put yourself in danger I couldn't protect you from. And you just saved both of us in a way I never could have alone. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Don't be. You did exactly what needed to be done." His thumb traced my cheekbone. "You're not collateral damage, Emma. You're the person who changes everything by refusing to accept the world as it is." He kissed me, not desperate, but with certainty. Like coming home. When we broke apart, the sky was lightening over Brooklyn. For the first time since he'd walked through my door, I felt truly free. Not because threats were gone, but because I'd stopped letting others define my life. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we deal with whatever comes next. Together, as equals. No more rules about where you can go. You've proven you can handle the real world. I want to finish this. James destroyed other families like mine. I want to help them. Track down stolen assets. Return them to their owners. That could take years. I know. And I want you with me. Not as my protector. As my partner." Dominic was quiet, emotions shifting across his face. "You're asking me to go legitimate. I'm asking you to go different, to use what you know to help people instead of just surviving them." I took his hand. "What if we could build something that makes it harder for people like Walsh and James to crush others?" Finally, he spoke with tentative hope. "All right, we'll try it your way. But this won't be easier. It'll be harder, more likely to fail. I know. But at least it'll be ours. Our choice. Our risk." We walked back through Manhattan as sun rose, turning the city from shadow to light. My phone buzzed. A message. "You won this round, Emma, but the game isn't over. Watch your back. Next time, you won't see me coming." I showed Dominic. He read it, then deleted it. "Walsh? Probably. Or someone else in her network. There's always someone else." He put his arm around me. "But that's tomorrow's problem." And as we walked through morning streets, I realized that was the point. Not safety, not even justice. Just the simple act of choosing to build something with someone who saw you clearly and decided you were worth the risk. The threats would keep coming, but I had something worth fighting for that was mine. Freedom, partnership, purpose, and the knowledge that I was finally in control of my own story. The weeks after Pier 17 unfolded with the strange texture of a life being rebuilt from materials you didn't know you had. Dominic and I moved into a different apartment, not the one he'd provided, but one we chose together in Brooklyn, close enough to Moretti's that I could smell the bread baking on Sunday mornings. It was smaller than the Tribeca place, older, with radiators that clanked and windows that didn't quite close all the way. It was perfect. James Carver's trial began in January, 3 months after his arrest. I testified for 2 days, walking the jury through every document, every transaction, every calculated cruelty that had destroyed my mother and dozens of others like her. The defense tried to paint me as a woman scorned, as someone with an agenda, as unreliable. But the evidence spoke louder than their insinuations. Dr. Chen testified. Federal investigators laid out the network. And when the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but a quiet settling, like bones finally healing after being broken for too long. My mother's property was returned to her estate, which meant it was returned to me. The buildings James had stolen, including the one housing Moretti's, became mine by legal right. I could have sold them, taken the money, disappeared into a life where none of this had ever touched me. Instead, I did something different. I kept Moretti's exactly as it was, hired back Sophia and Marco and everyone who'd been afraid to speak to me when I'd been under Dominic's protection. I turned the other buildings into affordable housing, using rental income to fund a legal aid clinic specializing in estate fraud cases. We helped families navigate the same system that had destroyed my mother, gave them resources to fight back against predators like James who saw vulnerability as opportunity. Dominic helped me set it up, not as the dangerous man who'd walked into my unlocked door, but as someone who understood power structures intimately enough to dismantle them. He was teaching me things about leverage and influence that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with knowing which pressure points in bureaucracy could be pushed to create change. We were building something neither of us had imagined possible, a partnership that used what we'd survived to help others survive better. But Walsh's message had been prophetic. Next time, you won't see me coming. 6 weeks after the trial, I started noticing things. Small things. A car that appeared too often on my morning walk. A man in the coffee shop who seemed more interested in me than his laptop. The particular feeling of being watched that I'd learned to recognize during those weeks when James had been documenting my every move. I told Dominic immediately. No more secrets, no more solo operations. He made calls, pulled in resources, discovered what I'd already suspected. Walsh hadn't given up. She'd just gone underground, building a new case, recruiting new allies, waiting for the moment when we'd relax our guard. The moment came on a Tuesday in March, unseasonably warm, the kind of day that tricks you into believing winter is finally over. I was at the legal aid clinic, reviewing files with Sarah, who'd forgiven me for dragging her into my world, and had decided that if danger was inevitable, she might as well make herself useful, when Dominic called. They're moving tonight, he said without preamble. Walsh has enough evidence to indict both of us. Racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. She's been building parallel cases, using sealed federal records we can't access to defend against. We have maybe 6 hours before warrants are issued. My blood went cold. What do? We have 2 choices. We run. I have resources in place. We could be out of the country by midnight. Or we fight. But if we fight, Emma, we do it in court, publicly. With everything that implies about exposure, about our lives becoming public record, about facing consequences we might not be able to control. I looked around the clinic, at the families waiting for help, at Sarah organizing files, at the walls covered with thank you letters from people we'd been able to assist. 3 months ago, this hadn't existed. 3 months ago, I'd been someone who survived by staying invisible. Now I was someone who'd chosen visibility, chosen to matter, chosen to build something that helped people besides myself. Running would mean abandoning all of it. Fighting would mean risking everything. We fight, I said. We've been building something that actually matters, Dominic. I'm not letting Walsh destroy it because she's better at manipulating the system than we are at defending against it. Then we do this right. I'm calling my lawyers now. We're going to need the best criminal defense team on the East Coast, and we're going to need them to understand that this isn't about winning on technicalities. It's about proving that what we've built is legitimate. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Lawyers arrived at the apartment with boxes of documents. Dominic walked them through every business decision, every financial transaction, every move we'd made since James's arrest. I provided evidence of the legal aid work, testimonials from families we'd helped, documentation proving that my buildings were being run as legitimate affordable housing, not fronts for criminal enterprise. At 11:47 p.m., there was a knock on the door. Federal agents, badges out, warrants in hand. They were professional, almost apologetic, as they read us our rights and placed us in separate cars. As we were driven to federal holding facilities, I caught Dominic's eyes through the window of his vehicle and saw in his expression not fear, but determination, the same look he'd had on Pier 17 when he'd emerged from shadows to back my play against Walsh. We were in this together. Whatever came next, we'd face it as partners. The arraignment happened the next morning. Walsh was there, looking triumphant, ready to paint us as criminals who'd manipulated the system for personal gain. But our lawyers were ready too, armed with evidence that every action we'd taken had been legal, documented, and in service of helping people the system had failed. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes who'd seen every variation of corruption in her 30 years on the bench, listened to both sides, then did something unexpected. She set bail, but she also ordered an independent investigation into Walsh's methods, noting for the record that using sealed federal documents to build cases against citizens who'd cooperated with federal prosecutors raised questions about prosecutorial misconduct that needed to be answered before the case could proceed. Walsh's face went pale. In trying to destroy us, she'd exposed herself to the same scrutiny she'd been using as a weapon. The judge gave us supervised release, electronic monitoring, restrictions on travel, but we were going home, together. The trial took 4 months. 4 months of depositions and hearings and media coverage that turned our lives into public spectacle. 4 months of watching Walsh try to prove we were criminals while our lawyers systematically demonstrated that every business we ran, every dollar we'd spent, every decision we'd made had been meticulously legal. 4 months of sitting in a courtroom and feeling the weight of consequences, not for crimes we'd committed, but for daring to exist in the spaces between what the law explicitly allowed and what people like Walsh thought should be forbidden. In the end, the verdict was anticlimactic in its simplicity, not guilty on all counts. The judge went further, issuing a written opinion that noted Walsh had engaged in a pattern of prosecutorial overreach, motivated not by pursuit of justice but by personal vendetta and desire to control private citizens' legitimate business activities. Walsh was referred to the state bar for disciplinary proceedings. Her career was over. We walked out of that courthouse into bright June sunshine, and I felt something I'd never expected to feel. Not relief or triumph, but a kind of profound exhaustion mixed with gratitude. We'd survived. We'd fought the system and won, not because we were innocent. I'd broken laws, lied to federal agents, stolen evidence, recorded conversations without consent, but because we'd learned how to fight within the system's rules better than Walsh had learned to manipulate them from the inside. That night, Dominic and I stood on the roof of our Brooklyn apartment building, watching the city spread out below us in all its complicated, beautiful, dangerous glory. Somewhere down there, people were suffering the way my mother had suffered, being crushed by systems designed to protect power rather than people. Somewhere down there, another woman was probably standing in a locked apartment, believing she was safe right up until the moment someone walked through her door and changed everything. "What are you thinking?" Dominic asked, his arm around my shoulders. "I'm thinking about that night you walked into my apartment. How terrified I was. How certain I was that you were there to destroy me. And now I understand that you were there to show me who I could become if I stopped choosing safety over everything else." I leaned into him. "I spent so long trying to survive that I forgot survival wasn't the same as living. You taught me the difference. You taught me something too." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I spent 15 years building power because I thought it would protect me from ever being weak again. But power just made me harder, colder, more isolated. You showed me that strength isn't about never being vulnerable. It's about choosing who you're vulnerable with. About finding someone who sees your weaknesses and decides they're worth protecting anyway." We stood there in silence, two people who'd been broken by different circumstances and had somehow found wholeness in each other. Not the wholeness of being fixed or saved or rescued, but the wholeness of being seen completely and chosen anyway. Of building something together that was more than either of us could have built alone. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. The Martinez family just called. Their grandmother's estate was stolen using the same methods James used on your mom. They need help. Can we take the case? I showed Dominic. He read it, then smiled. Not the cold, calculated expression I'd first seen, but something warmer, more genuine. Can we take the case? He asked. That's up to you. You're the one who built this. I'm just along for the ride. We built it, together. I texted Sarah back. Set up a meeting for tomorrow morning. We'll help them fight. Because that was what we did now. We fought. Not for power or revenge or even justice in the abstract, but for people who needed someone in their corner who understood that the system wasn't neutral, that safety was a privilege, that survival required more than just enduring. We fought because we knew what it cost not to fight. because we'd both been the people no one fought for, and we'd decided that was something we could change, one family at a time, one case at a time, one choice at a time. The threats hadn't ended. Walsh was gone, but there would be others, people who saw what we were building and wanted to control it or destroy it or co-opt it for their own purposes. The work was hard, complicated, often frustrating. Some cases we won, some we lost, some families we could help, some we couldn't reach in time. But we kept building, kept fighting, kept choosing to matter in a world that had tried very hard to make us believe we were just collateral damage in other people's wars. And on the good days, the days when a family got their property back, when justice actually worked the way it was supposed to, when people who'd been crushed by the system found the resources to stand back up, I would think about my mother, about what she would have thought of the woman I'd become. Not the scared girl who'd stood by her hospital bed, powerless to stop her slow erasure, but the woman who'd learned to transform grief into purpose, who'd turned proximity to danger into partnership, who'd discovered that the opposite of being destroyed wasn't being saved. It was learning to fight back. I'd walked into that tiny apartment above Moretti's bakery believing I could disappear, that invisibility was the same as safety, that if I just made myself small enough, the world would stop taking from me. Instead, Dominic Castellano had walked through my unlocked door and shown me that the world only takes from people who accept that taking as inevitable. That power wasn't about dominating others, it was about refusing to be dominated. That safety wasn't something you found by hiding. It was something you built by choosing who you built it with. I'd been terrified that night he'd said, "You shouldn't feel safe here." Terrified because he was right, I wasn't safe. I'd never been safe. Safety had always been an illusion, a story I told myself to make surviving bearable. But what I'd found was better than safety. I'd found purpose, partnership, the dangerous, exhilarating knowledge that I was the author of my own story now, not just a character in someone else's tragedy. I'd found freedom, and freedom, I'd learned, wasn't about being unafraid. It was about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. About facing consequences and deciding they were worth it. About building something fragile and beautiful and meaningful in a world that was constantly trying to break things down. We stood on that roof until the sun started to rise over Brooklyn, painting the city in shades of gold and pink and possibility. Somewhere below us, another day was beginning, full of threats and opportunities and moments where people would have to choose between safety and significance. And we'd be there, ready to fight alongside anyone who chose significance. Ready to show them that the opposite of being crushed wasn't being protected. It was learning to stand up and fight back. Together. If you made it to the end of this story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, and click the yellow bell to subscribe to the channel and support us. Keep the adventure going by clicking on the suggested video on your screen.